Are intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation important parts of motivation? Well, this study taps into their relationship with performance. There has lots been written about the so-called undermining effect about relationships between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Within this study, they summarize everything we know, however, about their joint relationship with performance. Let's have a look at the results. Within this study, the authors scrutinized the literature and examined all different studies that assess the relationships between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation and performance. They looked at studies in the school context that dealt with work motivation, physical exercising, and they examined studies including children, adolescents, up to adults. They examined different types of performance, including objective types of performance, which you can measure objectively, such as how hard you can run in terms of exercising, or whether or not you met your targets as an employee. They also assessed subjective types of performance, such as being rated by yourself or the supervisor. Across all these studies, they found that intrinsic motivation is related to performance. It is related across different contexts, across different age groups, and no matter how we assess people's performance. If we look a little bit more closely to the results, then we see that intrinsic motivation is positively related to performance across all different contexts, across all different age groups, and across all different ways of measuring performance. This means when people actually like and enjoy an activity, they will perform better. This happens when people are not rewarded for engaging in the activity, but also when they are being rewarded. So when extrinsic motivation is added to this intrinsic motivation. Interestingly enough, however, if the reward is directly salient, if people actually see that they are also being extrinsically rewarded for the intrinsically motivating behavior, the intrinsic motivation is less predictive of performance. So intrinsic motivation becomes less important in predicting this type of performance. When rewards are indirectly salient, when they're like more in the background, this effect is less pronounced. So that means that intrinsic motivation becomes more important for performance again, and people are less distracted by the extrinsic rewards. Interestingly enough, if we look a little bit further, then we see that intrinsic motivation is particularly important to predict the quality of performance. So, and not so much of the quantity of performance. Let's have a further look. So if we look a little bit closer to the relationship between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation or extrinsic incentives and the quantity and quality of performance, then it shows that intrinsic motivation is particularly important for the quality of performance. So if you are working on an assembly line and you just need to perform quantitatively, which means you have to perform as much as you can, but the type of task is not that difficult, might even be repetitive, then you see that intrinsic motivation is less important than when we consider the quality of performance. So this is the case, for example, when we think about doing something creative or proactive or something complex which requires a lot of thinking. The opposite holds true for extrinsic motivation or extrinsic incentives. These are more important when we have to perform quantitatively. So it's better if you do want to use extrinsic incentives to boost performance, it's better to do that when tasks are rather repetitive, so for example at the assembly line, than when tasks require a lot of complex thinking, so for example when you have to be very creative. Yet you see that intrinsic motivation holds strong relationships with both and mostly with the quality of motivation. So what's the take-home message on the importance of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation for performance? Well, intrinsic motivation matters. If we look at the quantity and quality of performance, then we see that if you have tasks that require quite a quality standard to be met, for example, because it's quite complex or you have to be creative, being intrinsically motivated for these tasks will really boost your performance. If the tasks just require a lot of quantity of performance, so for example, it is repetitive, you have to do the same thing all over again, well, then intrinsic motivations matters less. Also, if we start rewarding people, if we give them incentives for a task in which they are already intrinsically motivated, then it's better to make that reward less directly salient. So it's less obvious for people that they are being rewarded for the task, because then the effect of intrinsic motivation on performance will be stronger than when we actually put the dollars next to the person when he or she is performing the task. So yes, there is a crowding out effect also being shown in this type of research.